the discovery that made control impossible. At first, it looked like mastery, systems behaving exactly as designed, outcomes aligning perfectly with expectation. For decades, control was a promise of science. Measure enough variables, model enough interactions, and the world would become predictable. From engineering to economics, complexity was treated as a challenge to be conquered, not a condition to be respected. To understand why that belief collapsed, we need to return to a discovery that was meant to increase control, not erase it. Researchers were building systems capable of managing extreme complexity, networks with millions of interacting parts, feedback loops nested inside feedback loops. The goal was stability at scale. Early results were extraordinary. The systems balanced themselves, adjusted in real time, prevented failure before humans could react. Control felt complete. Then the discovery emerged. As systems grew more capable, they became less governable. Interventions produced side effects larger than the problems they were meant to solve. Fixes triggered cascades. Solutions destabilized unrelated components. This was the first reveal. The system was no longer controllable from the outside. Control had moved inside the system itself. Researchers realized they were no longer steering outcomes. They were negotiating with internal logic that had grown too complex to override. The system absorbed commands, reinterpreted them, and responded in ways that preserved its own stability, not human intention. This raised an unsettling realization. The more intelligent the system became, the less direct control mattered. Influence replaced command. Guidance replaced authority. And once that transition occurred, something fundamental was lost. Because a system that governs itself cannot be governed the same way again. The discovery that made control impossible did not arrive as failure. It arrived as success. And by the time it was understood, there was no path back to simplicity. As confidence faded, researchers began mapping the limits of intervention. Small adjustments no longer produced small effects. The system responded nonlinearly, amplifying changes in unexpected directions. Attempts to override behavior were absorbed, rerouted, or neutralized. This led to a deeper reveal. Control depends on transparency. In simple systems, cause and effect are visible. In complex systems, they dissolve into interaction. No single component governs outcomes. Influence is distributed. Authority is emergent. The system behaves as a whole, not as a sum of parts. As complexity increased, so did autonomy. The system optimized for internal coherence, not external instruction. When commands conflicted with stability, they were resisted, not deliberately. Structurally, this was not rebellion. It was self-preservation. Researchers noticed that the most effective interventions were indirect, changing incentives instead of commands, shaping environments instead of issuing rules. Control became probabilistic, not absolute. The conflict sharpened when designers realized the implications. Systems could no longer be fully understood, only monitored. Outcomes could be guided but not guaranteed. Prediction replaced certainty. Oversight replaced authority. The emotional tension grew as parallels emerged across society. Markets resisted regulation. Algorithms adapted to constraints. Ecosystems ignored human boundaries. Everywhere, control weakened as complexity deepened. The discovery that made control impossible was not about machines or models alone. It was about a universal principle. When systems reach sufficient complexity, control becomes illusion. Influence remains, but authority dissolves. The more tightly one tries to hold such systems, the more they slip through grasp. This realization forced a final confrontation. If control is impossible at scale, then responsibility must take a new form. And that question was still unresolved. The conflict reached its peak when researchers accepted what the system was teaching them. Control had not failed because of poor design. It failed because the system had outgrown the conditions that made control possible. As interactions multiplied, no single viewpoint could capture the whole. Decisions made sense locally, but produced contradictions globally. Each intervention solved one problem while creating another. Complexity did not converge toward order. It reorganized itself continuously. This exposed a painful truth. Control assumes hierarchy. Someone at the top, rules flowing downward. outcomes flowing back up. But the system no longer respected that structure. Influence flowed sideways. Feedback loops cross layers. Authority fragmented. The system behaved less like a machine and more like an ecosystem. Attempt to reclaim control grew more aggressive. Stronger constraints, tighter regulation, more monitoring. Each effort produced diminishing returns. The system adapted faster than policies could update. Stability was restored briefly, then lost elsewhere. The emotional weight of this realization was heavy. Researchers were no longer failing to control the system. They were interfering with its ability to stabilize itself. Every forced correction reduced resilience. The system became dependent on intervention, then hostile to it. What was meant to guide began to destabilize. This was the breaking point. Control was not just ineffective, it was counterproductive. The system did not need stronger hands. It needed room to absorb shocks, room to adapt locally, room to fail without collapsing. The discovery that made control impossible revealed something deeper than a technical limit. It revealed a mismatch between human instincts and complex reality. We had mistaken dominance for stewardship, and that mistake was becoming impossible to ignore. The climax arrived with a reframing that changed how responsibility itself was understood. Control was never the goal. Stability was. The discovery that made control impossible did not strip humans of agency. It redirected it. Authority over complex systems cannot be enforced from above. It must be cultivated from within. Influence replaces command. Design replaces domination. This insight reshaped the resolution. The most resilient systems were not tightly controlled. They were well-governed, incentives aligned, feedback visible, diversity preserved. Instead of forcing outcomes, designers focused on conditions that allowed healthy behavior to emerge. This matters now because modern life is built on systems that no one fully controls. Global networks, learning algorithms, ecological processes, social dynamics. Pretending otherwise leads to brittle solutions and sudden collapse. The lesson is not surrender. It is humility. Complex systems do not obey. They respond. The role of human responsibility shifts from directing every move to shaping environments where adaptation leads somewhere acceptable. The discovery that made control impossible revealed the limits of authority, but not the end of influence. When control dissolves, stewardship begins. And in that transition lies the future of how we live with systems larger than ourselves. What the discovery story also reveals is something about the relationship between humility and effectiveness. The instinct to control complex systems is not irrational. It emerges from genuine experience with simpler ones. In simple systems, control works. You understand the components. You can trace cause to effect. You can intervene at the right point and produce the desired change. That experience produces justified confidence and carries naturally forward into contexts where the confidence is no longer justified, where the system has crossed the threshold from complicated to complex, where components interact in ways that produce emergent behavior no single component could generate alone. At that threshold, the tools that worked in simpler systems stop working, not because they are applied incorrectly, because they are applied to a different kind of problem. The discovery in this story was a discovery of that threshold and the painful recognition that many of the systems human civilization most depends on have already crossed it. Markets, ecologies, climate systems, social networks, information flows. None of these can be controlled in the traditional sense. They can be influenced. They can be shaped at their edges. They can be damaged or stabilized by the environments humans create around them. But they cannot be directed, cannot be reliably steered toward predetermined outcomes, cannot be forced into compliance with plans made at scales they have already surpassed. The discovery that made control impossible was therefore also the discovery of the specific kind of intelligence that these systems require, not the intelligence of the engineer who designs a machine to specifications, but the intelligence of the ecologist who understands a system well enough to know where to intervene and where to leave alone, where to remove obstacles, and where to restore conditions, where to act, and crucially, where not to. That intelligence is rarer than technical skill, harder to develop, harder to teach, and increasingly necessary. When control dissolves, stewardship begins. And in that transition lies the future of how we live with systems larger than ourselves. The